So I see it's started to stabilize, so I think I'll go ahead and get started. So welcome to everyone that's just joined. Thank you for joining us for today's City Canada webinar, Pollinator Habitat Restoration in Municipalities, Case Studies and Learnings from the City of Calgary. So before we get into the content, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the land that I'm seated on. I'm joining us today from Toronto, which is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. It's currently home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people, and it's covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. I know we're participating today from all across Canada, so I invite you to reflect on the land that you're seated on as well. And as people on this land, may we all dedicate ourselves to moving forward in partnership, collaboration, and reconciliation as we learn together and contemplate the possibilities ahead. So in our last webinar, we highlighted how municipalities can empower residents through lawn bylaws to create pollinator habitat on private land. And to do that, we brought on folks from the City of Toronto who discussed pollinator-friendly changes to their bylaw. And today we're switching gears from empowering habitat creation on private land to focus on how municipalities can create habitat themselves on public land. So to do so, we have speakers from the City of Calgary and Earthmaster that are going to take us through the creation of two major pollinator habitat restoration projects in Calgary. The Canyon Meadows Bee Boulevard, and also the 16th Avenue Northeast Naturalization Pilot project. So they're going to walk us through the nitty-gritty details of habitat restoration, including site preparation, species selection, seed mix design, installation, and ongoing maintenance. So we're delighted to have four guests with us today. I'll introduce them more thoroughly in a moment, but one is Jenna Cross, a parks ecologist from the City of Calgary. And the other three are Elizabeth Murray, Ben Polterak, and Ken Cryer from Earthmaster Environmental Strategies, which is an innovative environmental consulting firm that worked with Calgary on these habitat projects that we're going to discuss today. So Jenna Cross currently works as a park ecologist for the City of Calgary and Calgary Parks Urban Conservation. She graduated with a Bachelor of Biological Sciences with distinction, majoring in botany from the University of Calgary, and has been a professional biologist in Alberta for over 15 years. She began her career performing various botanical surveys throughout Alberta, including vegetation mapping, wetland assessment, and delineation. Jenna then went on to manage the various botanical and riparian aspects of drilling fields, such as lease and pipeline siting, routing, restoration post-disturbance, and environmental mitigation during construction. Jenna started at the City of Calgary in 2009. As a born and raised Calgarian who grew up hiking around Calgary, learning the various plant and bird names from her grandma, she remembers how Calgary has changed during her lifetime and tries to make restoration plans that mimic the more native vegetation community that was present when she was a child. In her current role as parks ecologist, she has had the opportunity to do many different things, such as writing policy documents that provide information on best management practices during restoration, performing various types of restoration in different land use types, training staff, and acting as citywide botanical subject matter expert. Jenna is very appreciative that she gets to utilize her skills every day to improve the city that she loves. Elizabeth Murray is a senior scientist with Earthmaster Environmental Strategies in Calgary, Alberta. She's a graduate of Lakehead University in Thunder Bay, Ontario, and Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. She has a PhD in human genetics, and she has worked for more than 20 years in medical-related research and in plant-based biotechnology, developing biologics as treatments for human diseases. Elizabeth has worked in environmental sciences for over 10 years and plays a lead role in the analysis and reporting of phytoremediation research and results. She also manages the research and development of Earthmaster's Pep Systems Technologies. Ben Poltorak is a project manager with Earthmaster Environmental Strategies. He has a Bachelor of Science in Forest Management from the University of Alberta and a Master of Science in Forest Engineering from the University of New Brunswick. He's been a beekeeper since 1995, after being recruited at a young age to help on a nearby commercial operation. Focusing on hive health, Ben and his wife operate Pet and Bee Veterinary Services, the first approved bee-specific veterinary practice in Alberta. Ben has been resolving environmental challenges in terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems from coast to coast to coast for more than 15 years. Kent Cryer is a remediation manager with Earthmaster Environmental Strategies. He is originally from Estevan, Saskatchewan, and is a graduate of the University of Saskatchewan with a degree in environmental science. Kent has over 20 years of environmental consulting, program development, and management experience in the commercial and upstream downstream oil and gas industries. He's been a professional agrologist for 17 years and manages large remediation projects across Alberta. Kent has been the manager of the phytoremediation program at the company for over 15 years and has managed commercial field projects across Canada and the northern USA. So that covers our introductions. I expect we'll have a little bit of time at the end of the talk for questions. So if you do have any questions, please type them into the Q&A, and then we'll get to as many as we can at the end. So with all that said, I'll hand it over to Jenna to kick us off.
Thanks, Jordan, and thanks for the opportunity to speak today. As mentioned, we're going to be discussing various case studies and learnings from the City of Calgary regarding pollinator habitat restoration. Just a little outline of how we're going to proceed. I'm going to provide some background, talk about our collaboration work. Then we will focus on the Canyon Meadows Bee Boulevard, go on to the 16th Avenue Northeast pilot project, and then talk about some of the various bee hotels and bee habitat enhancements on 16th Avenue, and conclude with some future opportunities, and then of course some question and answer session after that. So the background, when I started at the City of Calgary in 2009, we initially focused on managing natural environment parks and natural areas. And some of those that people may be familiar with include Nose Hill Park, Weaselhead Flats, Edworthy Park, Inglewood Bird Sanctuary, places like that. Those are the larger, more well-known natural environment parks. And why did we focus on natural areas? Well, we focused on them to see what needed to be done. We looked at their health, and of course, in these natural environment parks, the money, where we put our money, it does give us a bigger bang for our buck because they are located along primary corridors, movement corridors for wildlife, which are along our major water courses. We still focus on natural environment parks for restoration, and we focus on them because they're environmentally sensitive. They're important for wildlife movement. They're connected, the ones that are along the river, they're fairly connected. They also contain source populations of various organisms, and they have a reduced edge effect because they are larger, so they have healthier vegetation communities. We have various decision processes in place to determine what our priorities are within these parks for restoration. And we, in those decision processes, we also consider our bottom line. So of course, we look at the economic, environmental, and social aspects. For example, if somebody's not going to, if users don't want to use the park, then maybe we shouldn't invest a lot of money to make it into a natural environment park with trails and things like that. Also, where does it make most economic sense? If you have a really long, narrow space, you're going to have increased edge effects, and maybe it's not worth putting in as much money into these areas. So those are some things that we look at. What are various decision processes? We have many of them, but one of the things that we definitely utilize is the mapping of the primary and secondary ecological corridors. So the primary corridors are located along our water courses, as mentioned. So that's more or less less impeded, basically, for movement, because you can travel, wildlife can travel along those corridors. But the secondary ecological corridors are areas that are connected somewhat outside of those water courses. So for example, like Nose Hill, you would have a secondary ecological corridor connecting Nose Hill to those various water courses, and which are primary ecological corridors. We also have another tool called habitat condition rating, and this this tool that we use, this model that we use, we redo it every 5 years or after a major change in the park. We use a collector app, and we collect this information on the iPad. A lot of this data does overlap with rangeland health assessments. However, it does focus more on the urban aspect, such as existing trails, things like that within the park. And what's pretty neat about this tool is that we can actually run the model based on the existing city's spatial and habitat data as a prediction tool without actually doing the site visit. Of course, we need to do a field check, but we can run it first. We can see how it comes out, and then go and field verify the results. As mentioned, with respect to the corridor analysis, it uses a permeability model. So basically kind of like hooking up a battery to the city and seeing where the charge goes, where it's not impeded. But upon looking at these maps and looking at all these other open spaces, we were kind of thinking like, what about these smaller organisms that maybe don't require these large corridors to move around? What about these smaller organisms that, maybe could refuel on these little medians and roadsides and these more disjointed areas? So with that, and then with also looking at the challenges of roadside vegetation and how we often see that it doesn't seem to thrive and it doesn't seem to provide too many ecological benefits, we decided, well, maybe we should collaborate together with other business units that manage these other areas besides natural areas, such as Calgary Roads that manage the medians and roadsides. It's kind of a funny story because my husband was actually working for Dave Misfelt, and he was doing weeding on the medians and boulevards. And the same thought occurred to him as had occurred to Dave previously, I think back in like 2004, that, hey, why don't we do something with these areas instead of just weeding them? Let's make them into habitat. Like, let's put flowers on them, and let's do something to help the bees and the wildlife and improve the ecological health of the city, and not just focus on these natural areas and look at all these other areas that can be utilized to improve the ecological health of the city, and basically manage the city's open space network more as a network versus kind of that distinction between natural areas and other areas. So my husband, luckily he has a high opinion of me. I guess lots of pressure on me, but he's like, my wife can grow stuff anywhere. So that's when I started working collaboratively with Calgary Roads, and that's when Dave told me that he was having some problems with some projects where he wasn't able to grow anything on these medians. So then after that, we started working together consistently, and it's come and it's come up to this point where we're doing large projects together with Calgary Roads and Calgary Parks. So one of the projects that he was concerned about was Canyon Meadows Boulevard. I guess they had been trying to grow vegetation on these medians for a long time. and it was failing. Pretty much they tried different approaches. They couldn't seem to get anything to work. So you can see 2009 versus 2015, it really doesn't look any different, just a few scattered weeds. But we also thought, you know, if we're going to be putting money into growing vegetation on these medians, we should try to show some value. So we brought in academia. We brought in Lincoln Best from the University of Calgary, who also works at Oregon State University now. We brought in Alexandria Farmer from Oral University. And then what happened was this turned into a partnership. So at first we started looking at pollinator biodiversity with Lincoln Best. We created this partnership with academia, and then came in Dr. Mindy Summers from the University of Calgary. And we started looking at also floral preferences. And she also integrated some citizen science into this work where citizens can look at various flowers and see what kind of insects visit those flowers. And this is important. Floral preferences, when we do restoration, we thought it would be great to know what some of these specialized bees feed on, so then we can incorporate these plants into our restoration designs. So why was Canyon Meadows median challenging? Well, it's a large area, it's narrow, it's long, it stretches from Bow Bottom Trail to McLeod Trail along Canyon Meadows Drive. So it contains 0.6 hectares of median. Because of Calgary's climate, we have a lot of salinity in the soils from de-icing activities. And we also have a lot of sediment loading on these medians from the gravel for de-icing activities. Consistent and constant salt spray. And we also have limited soil volume, which makes it difficult for the salt to flush out of these soils in the spring with spring precipitation. Poor soils that contain some clay. So basically we had hard pan soils with a hardened crust. And we have a lack of organics, basically no topsoil. It's all mixed together, or termed as admixed when the subsoil and topsoil is mixed. And of course, the soil food web is severely lacking. So the natural biota that is in the soil is absent. And some more challenges. Canyon Meadows is a busy road, so it's difficult to do work on these medians because you cannot close lanes consistently for watering and weeding, and say if you wanted to do a mulch design, replacing mulch, things like that. The medians were built up in the middle to accommodate the trees. Unfortunately, a lot of those perished. But again, learning opportunity, that was in the past. But we thought when we went and looked at this area, we figured, more of a grassy wildflower design would be appropriate, because also too, as mentioned, soil volume is lacking. So that makes it difficult for some of these trees and other larger species to thrive. Also, with respect to the mulch, in the past, there was mulch designs that were done on these beds. And I'm not a fan of mulch personally. It does have its uses, but for a naturalized, more naturalized design, it is not the best in my opinion, because the decomposition of mulch uses nitrogen. And that's okay for regularly fertilized shrub beds. But when you're dealing with something that is low maintenance, where you're not going to be doing a lot of inputs, again, not the best thing, because then your vegetation tends to get nitrogen deprived. Of course, mulch in a roadway, that can be problematic because it migrates into the roadway with precipitation. And it also reduces the vegetative spread of desirable plants, because as you probably are aware, mulch is often used as a weed suppressant. And also mulch, if you have self-seeding of your desirable plants, it pretty much eliminates that the viability of that seed being able to grow into a new plant, because it decreases the seed to soil contact. So how did we do this? Well, first, because the area was pretty much devoid of vegetation, really poor soil, compacted, just not good soil at all. We removed the first 10 centimeters of soil and added new loam. We also added gypsum for salt mitigation. And we also utilized a balanced 4-4-4 amendment to improve the soil food web. So this amendment contains fossilized bat guano, insect shells from feed production, a whole bunch of byproducts from industry that are naturally derived that create this balanced 4-4-4. And also too, with respect to this median, I designed a seed mix that I thought that would work. So that was another thing that we could utilize custom seed mixes for this, especially when you're not using sod. So a lot of people are like, why didn't you just use sod? Well, sod does poorly in these environments. Even the most salt tolerant sod generally is not that salt tolerant. And you can kind of infer that from how shallow the roots are. And it's not that drought tolerant as well, again, because of the shallow roots. You have to water the heck out of it in order to get it to establish. And in these environments where you have constant salt spray and sediment loading, usually it just perishes, especially along the edge. So when I was designing that seed mix, I went back in my head to when I was doing wetland assessments, and I thought about the species that thrive in that peripheral low prairie zone that is only wet for pretty much a couple days per year, and then it dries up. And we also have a lot of saline wetlands in Calgary, saline ephemeral wetlands and saline soils. So I thought about like the saltiest ones I remember, and then I thought about those species that are located on the edge that thrive. So I extrapolated that knowledge to create this seed mix. And fortunately, with respect to seeding, watering, you can water it. It definitely isn't required. It does give it a bit of a boost during times of drought, but it's not required for establishment. However, the timing is very, very important because you need to have that you need to have those fluctuating temperatures and precipitation regimes in order to break that hard seed coat that our native species have. Of course, with respect to seed, the availability and cost is always an issue. So I made a base mix that we seeded over the entire area of the median, which was 0.6 hectares as mentioned, at a rate of 50 kilograms per hectare. You can see we had a lot of various wildflowers, native wildflowers, native graminoids, some one naturally occurring hybrid, AC saltlander green wheatgrass, that's very salt tolerant. Quite a few native wildflowers, as well as some hardy salt and drought tolerant cultivars mixed in. And then areas that were problematic, such as the very edges where the seed, where it was difficult to get the seed to stick, we overseeded with this mix, with some of these really tough salt tolerant grasses. And we seed it in early spring and late fall. However, of course, sometimes, depending on your crew availability and stuff, you can, sometimes that timing isn't always ideal. However, we seed it as early in spring and as late into fall as much as possible. We hand broadcast the seed. And we did that through, when you hand broadcast, we would rake the seed. We would rake the soil, then we'd hand broadcast the seed, and then we'd rake it in. So that would ensure that we had that nice seed to soil contact. And we also used clean seed, which has been cleaned of organics and has also had the little fluffy spiky bits removed, like the say the awns, like the spiky bits, and the pappus, which can be kind of spiky or fluffy, and that when you use clean seed, it helps the seed stay in place better because it doesn't have those little appendages that make it fly away. And the agitation and the kind of somewhat scarification of removing those structures also triggers germination. We applied a light layer of pen mulch, much lighter than the specifications for turf grass, to keep the seed in place. It's a type of tackifier, but it doesn't need to be applied with a hydroseeder. So you can just basically sprinkle it on and water it, and it basically makes that kind of light layer, kind of this light paper layer. And with respect to our maintenance, we were able to get a fairly low maintenance median by doing these activities. And of course, hand broadcasting in something like this for seed was desirable because, in such a narrow area, it would have been very difficult to get a seeder on the narrow median. So with respect to our maintenance, we only mow one time per year, and that's late in the fall. And the thatch is removed because I did rely on some fairly aggressive grasses to start to establish, to condition the soils, such as the AC Saltlander green wheatgrass. And that is a species that was developed through the University of Lethbridge, and it comes from a naturally occurring wheatgrass hybrid. We also overseed it with annuals, both native and non-native, to get some coverage. And we did have a median that was initially done with a mulched design, but unfortunately kochia moved in, and it's been kind of problematic ever since. So we've been trying to get that median more like our other medians, but we're still finding that we're having trouble with that one, just because we had so much kochia move in from the past, because it was designed to look a little bit more manicured when the people entered the community. But we're trying to get it to be like the other medians that I designed with the naturalized seed mix. So you can see that initial establishment. You can see some of the pen mulch on the soil surface, which is kind of that papery layer, and you can see the sand foin starting to come up and break up that hard pan soil. So you can see a year after we seeded, that was 2018. We're starting to get some establishment. Again, it's slow, which restoration is slow, so you got to be patient. And you can start to see it fill in late July 2019. You see the sand foin and the bird's foot trefoil and some of the Flanders poppies annuals that we used for coverage. But you can still see we have some weeds. We have, foxtail barley, which is native, but still not as desirable on a pollinator project, of course, because it doesn't provide pollinator forage. And you can see we have various goosefoots, things like that still in there. But we're starting to, so now we have very good coverage. You can see early summer 2020, lots of nice sand foin, blue flax. We have alkali grass, Nuttall's alkali grass doing very well, Rocky Mountain fescue, the AC Saltlander green wheatgrass. And, it's kind of difficult because in some ways I maybe wouldn't use so much of that Saltlander grass, but then it's kind of hard to determine, and it's kind of a hard call because those aggressive grasses really did help condition the soil and, you know, break it up and get the biologics in there. So, you know, I think I'd probably reduce a little bit of the amount of grasses, but probably not by much if I had to redo this project over again. And now you can see that it's actually full of life. There's caterpillars, there's bees. I even stepped on an anthill when I was in the median. So the soil has become nice, it's moist. The seeded mix keeps, you know, the moisture in, so we don't need to use mulch. And yeah, it's thriving. So besides just the median, we thought, well, let's do some more stuff. Like, why not? Let's make it into a whole corridor. So we put in a main flower pollinator bed, and that's in the shape of half a flower, as you can see from the Google Earth. And we also put in various sandstone beds with native plants all along the park's land, along the road from Bow Bottom to McLeod Trail. We put in these sandstone beds, and we also put in various habitat enhancement structures. We put in various bee hotels made out of recycled logs. We put in many recycled logs that we had drilled out with various gauges all along the corridor for solitary nesting bees. And so for the main pollinator bed, how did we do it? And one of the really good things about doing this, even though it was a little bit more of a manicured style in a natural area, is the area was full of weeds. It was pretty much all thistle, tall hedge mustard, Kentucky bluegrass, crested wheatgrass, and smooth brome, where we did put in these areas. So, so basically we improved the overall health of the area. And also the bed is accessible even for people that have mobility challenges. So it makes it a nice feature that people can come to the natural area and, you know, look around even if they have mobility challenges. So we removed the top first layer of sod. So again, about the top 10 centimeters, we put down fresh loam to make the flower petals, and we edged that with recycled sandstone. And we planted native plants with the taller plants closest to Canyon Meadows Drive to maximize the floral encounters of the bees coming up from Fish Creek Park and from the bee hotels towards Fish Creek Park. And also this directs the bees up towards the road, because when the bees come and they fly, they'll be low down and they'll be getting, you know, trying to maximize their floral encounters. But when they come to a taller plant, they'll, you know, fly up, and then it takes them a little while to get back down again. So I wanted to direct them up towards the road versus down to ensure that they maximize their floral encounters, but also, you know, try to mitigate some mortality from the road. Although the experts have said that anything that, you know, we do like this and we provide habitat will offset mortality issues from traffic. So we also, we ensured that our plant choices bloom from early spring until frost, which is important when you're looking at doing work for pollinators. And as I mentioned, I really don't like mulch. So instead I hand broadcast seed into the flower beds. And I did that at a lower rate of 30 kilograms per hectare of this kind of ground cover mix that I made up. And it's 55% blue flax and 45% Rocky Mountain fescue. And here's just, here's a list of plants we used for the beds. And I also salvaged plants from the Pierce Estates native planters as the area was undergoing a redesign for Bend in the Bow. So those planters were not going to be used anymore. So I took all the native plants that I had planted in them and we salvaged them into various beds in Canyon Meadows. So as you can see, we have various habitat enhancement structures, and you can see our main pollinator bed in mid-spring with the blue flax in full bloom. The bees love it. And like I said, it provides a nice ground cover, and it mitigates for weeds, and it keeps the moisture in, and it also provides extra pollinator forage. You can see the wild bergamot kind of sticking out in between. And when you look down on the main pollinator bed, you can see you can see all the biodiversity that's actually in the bed, more so than just from the side. So when you look down, you can see the various asters that we planted, harebells, penstemons, prairie coneflower. We also put in some showy milkweed for the monarchs as well as other pollinators, and it's beautiful and it's very eye-catching. So a lot of people really like to see that, because especially after it blooms, the flowers turn into these really neat pods. Very, very unique looking plant. And you can see how it kind of flushes from pink and blue in the spring to more of a yellow and red in the fall. And you can see the blue flax provides extra pollinator forage. The bees are loving it. That's our main bee hotel on the left. And that's from, again, all recycled material. We do have a lot of occupancy for solitary nesting bees. And these are our sandstone beds that we put along Canyon Meadows. And what Dave did was he actually, he just basically put in a ring of recycled sandstone, put in a garden fabric liner, and then filled with fresh loam. And then we used a lot of our recycled plants from Pierce Estates and in there, as well as we got a few other ones, new ones, and then we seed it with our ground cover as well. And we did a fall planting for everything. So we put in the plants, we'd water them in, we'd seed them, and then we'd walk away and wait till spring, and it seemed to work very well. Curly cup gumweed, which pollinators love. We got some northern bed straw, and the maintenance again is very, very low. The maintenance on actually including the main pollinator bed and the sandstone beds, we only weed once per year maximum. Sometimes we do a thatch removal, but generally we don't have to, because the deer and the other herbivores maintain it naturally. So they're constantly in there eating and grazing, and it's great because it just keeps that canopy just open enough for the wildflowers to thrive and for the weeds not to come in because of that ground cover. And then we've also used those areas for a source for various seed for future use. So we've done a lot of blue flax collection, especially in the main pollinator bed for future use. And it was amazing. Even the crew even learned how to clean it. So that was really neat. We have some different displays, leaf cutter bee display. Of course, we have some interpretive signage so people know what's going on there. A sand bed for ground nesting bees. And while this all was happening, I was also preparing some various best practices documents that are cited in the landscape specifications book, the development guidelines and standard specifications for landscape construction. So all of this work, as well as all of the previous work in natural areas, restoring natural areas that I did, informed these various documents. So I was able to author City of Calgary seed mixes, which talks all about the creation of a seed mix, seed handling, everything that goes into a seed mix. And it also has an entire appendix of sample seed mixes for different habitat types and different maintenance regimes. Also soil handling recommendations, trying to deal with the salt in these areas, these roadside areas. That was a very good learning opportunity that fed into that document's creation, and City of Calgary plant lists. So that basically talks about planting plants, things you have to consider, storage, maintaining, ensuring that they don't go into shock. It also has an appendix for various plants for different habitat types and different maintenance regimes. And it was great that I got the opportunity to work on these different types of land uses, because otherwise I wouldn't have had as much experience, and I wouldn't have been able to write these seed mixes and create these seed mixes and plant lists and stuff for other areas outside of natural areas. And one of the best things, of course, that happened because of this work was the Bee City Canada certification that we got on December 19th, 2019. And of course, with our work and kind of this change from what we were doing before to trying to create these more flowery landscapes that support pollinators, we began to get some media coverage. Initially, it was about just about the Bee Boulevard, but after we had done all the planting work, we actually, Lincoln Best's group, they found 2 gypsy cuckoo bumblebees, and they are Schedule 1 species at risk on the SARA Act, Species at Risk Act, endangered. So I don't think that they've been found I don't think that they were found in the Calgary area since 2008 near Holden. Anyways, it kind of goes to that saying, it kind of proves that saying, like, if you plant it, they will come. So that was pretty exciting. And then further research has also indicated that these restored roadsides really do benefit pollinators. So because of this media attention, we caught the ear of the mayor and of our previous mayor, Mayor N.E, and we were able to submit an application to get funding to try to do this on a larger scale, and also do more robust monitoring and documentation on this work, so that we could really show, cost benefit analysis. And that's when we started to work on the 16th Avenue Naturalization Pilot project. And now I will give it to Earthmaster to speak, because they were very key in this work. They were our research partners and our implementation partners. So without them, this wouldn't have been possible. So thank you.
All right, thanks, Jenna. I'm assuming everyone can hear me. Yes. Good. Okay, so I'm going to take you through how we got the 16th Avenue project going here. So a little bit about us. We are an environmental technologies company, so we're based in Calgary, and we generally work in the oil and gas industry. We remediate and reclaim oil and gas sites, industrial sites. In addition to that, we have some in-house lab facilities where we do microbiology research, and we have a growth facility for testing plants. And we do this to develop a technology called Pep Systems, which is a phytoremediation technology that we use on commercial industrial sites to remediate soil. So basically, in our day jobs, we use a combination of plants and bacteria to remediate contaminants from soil in an eco-friendly way. Obviously, that's not what we did on this site. This site, we bid on the project because we'd had some previous interactions with Jenna, and we thought maybe our technology might be useful on this project. Ended up that we didn't go that direction, but anyways, we did get the bid, and so we worked with the city, and this is the project site as Jenna showed you. It's big, it's 5 hectares in site. The Trans-Canada Highway goes right down the middle, and it's up in Northeast Calgary. So the goals of the project were to change the vegetation management practices. They wanted to go from a manicured turf grass, which wasn't necessarily the best option for using the space, to putting in plants that were more adaptable. And it's to deal with changes in climate, pick plants that can withstand extremes and that are native to the area. So a lot of native grasses and wildflowers. And it would bring benefits that included increasing the diversity for the pollinators, reducing maintenance, because if you're putting in wildflowers, native grasses, then you don't have to mow them, you don't have to water them. And hopefully as they start to proliferate, you can minimize weed control as well. So by doing this, we're increasing resilience to the changing climate and also helping out the pollinator population. So keep in mind when you're looking at the pictures from this site and the overview of what we found, this is year one of a 3-year project. So this project was initiated in 2021. So our role, we worked with the project team to source and select the seed. And so that team consisted of people from the City of Calgary, the University of Calgary, and ISL Engineering. The bid actually had a couple of mixes already laid out and how they wanted the seed for the site. We changed that a bit depending on availability and cost, what we could get. So our goal was to procure the seed, make the mixes, and then install the seed using a no-till seed drill. We also added in a couple bonuses to this project when we bid on it. The first was to build and install social and solitary bee boxes throughout the site and get those social bee boxes registered with the Alberta Native Bee Council. And then we were also going to use our technology to see if that could enhance the survival of some of these plants in the more challenging areas of the site. We also approached this from a very scientific perspective where we set up a process for monitoring and assessing vegetation growth throughout the growing season. And then we were also tasked with conducting weed and litter control on the site. So those are the seed mixes that we used. There were 2 that were put together. Mix A was on the upper slopes of the site. It had a mixture of annuals, perennials, and grasses, quite a number of grasses there. And then mix B was designed to be adjacent to the roadway. So it was a little bit more salt tolerant than the one that went on the upper slopes. Less diverse and mostly perennials and grasses, but a little bit more salt tolerant. And these mixes were chosen based on the City of Calgary Seed Mix Guide, which is available online if you just search for that. And also, of course, as I mentioned, depending on what was available. And we also wanted to make sure that the species that were selected had lots of diversity. So we wanted to make sure that there was lots of color and overlapping flowering periods, and that the seeds were varied and could withstand a lot of conditions. So what we considered with the seed mixes, obviously source and volume. Some came from Canada and some from the US. And in all cases, we tried to utilize Canadian sources, but in some of the seed choices, there just wasn't seed available in the volumes that we needed from Canada, and we had to go to the US. Cost was a factor. The picture in the upper right there showing prairie sage, by far the most expensive seed, and teeny weeny tiny seed, little bag was like $3,000. So cost was definitely a factor. Salinity tolerance, of course, growing next to the medians where you got a lot of salt spray versus in the upper slopes. We picked mostly native species. There were a few horticultural species there, and there was a lot of annuals chosen for a cover crop in that first year. So this is what the site looked like when we first took control of it. I'm actually going to turn this over to Ben now. He's going to walk you through how we prepared that site and got the seed installed.
All right, thanks, Liz. Yes, this is early spring 2021. This is our first inspection, and there's a few things that pop out immediately. The first one is the significant amount of thatch or dead biomass that is on the surface of the site, and that's going to prevent us or inhibit us from getting good seed to soil contact. The second is the steep slopes, and we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. So to deal with the thatch, the first thing that we decided to do was to do a very low profile mowing event across the site. And during that mowing event, we pushed all the thatch to the lower slopes adjacent to the roadway. And then we collected this biomass and we loaded the material into tandem trucks. In total, across the 5 hectares of the site, we sent 12 loads to a composting facility. After the thatch was removed, we did another herbicide spray event to knock out the remaining turf grass that was still coming back. And then we continue with seeding. Next slide. So before we jumped into the seeding, we took some time a few days before to calibrate our seeder. As mentioned, we did use a Land Pride no-till drill, very similar to a Brilliant, if you're familiar with that type of model. And we worked with Mathis, Dr. Mathis with the UOC for the calibration. And basically we looked at the mass of the seed released from the no-till drill and related it to the area that the drill passed over. And during this calibration event, we did confirm that a bulking agent was required. We used wheat bran. It was readily available and relatively cost effective, as well as pretty easy to deploy on the site. And we did play with a few different mixtures as well, different ratios of the bulking agent with the seed. And we decided that the 1-to-1 was definitely the most beneficial, both to minimize the amount of stratification that the heavy seeds and the lighter seeds have during the actual seeding event, as well as to allow for efficient seeding throughout the seeder. And the seed, of course, was we blended it with the bulking agent on site rather than beforehand. Next slide, Liz. Now seeding was very interesting. We originally planned to use our drill seeder with a 3-point hitch on a tractor. But some of the steep slopes were in fact a safety concern and a bit of a logistical concern. So we worked with our contractor, and they had a skid steer with the with the Land Pride no-till drill attached to it. This is seasonal impacts. So the no-till drill was modified to be in contact with the skid steer, and this enabled us to go up and down and sideways across these slopes, very safe. It was a huge hurdle to overcome, but this was definitely the right tool for the job. This took approximately 12 hours, and during that time, we deployed 45 kilograms per hectare. Seeding was monitored right after the seeder passed over the soil. In addition, we used harrows to increase the seed to soil contact on the site. Now, one thing that was incredibly important on this site was to leave that stubble on site. That stubble, we didn't want to disturb the soil or till it or work it in. Obviously, that's going to stimulate additional weeds in the seed bed, but the stubble also protects the seed and soil from erosion, as well as additional organics to the soil, and helps to protect it from some of the desiccating wind and sun that we do see in Calgary. Next slide. And as mentioned, we did utilize some bee boxes. The first one being the social bee boxes. We utilized the plans from the Alberta Native Bee Council. And as mentioned, we have registered these bee boxes with them. We also deployed some solitary bee boxes. Now, these were a bit of a creation of our own devices, where we use different size nesting holes, anywhere from 10 to 2 millimeters in diameter. And we utilize balsam poplar logs to build these little structures. In addition, we also set up some information sheets with these bee boxes. These information sheets were available on both sides of the fence. And it allowed an opportunity for us to engage with the residents in the community, for them to acknowledge and see what's going on this site. And it was very interesting and always great to talk with some of the locals to talk about some of the changes and developments that are occurring in their own backyard.
Right. The other thing we did was a trial of our Pep System technology, and basically what Pep Systems is a plant growth promoting rhizobacteria enhanced phytoremediation system. So it uses plant bacteria on seed to see if we can give some advantages to the seed. Normally we would use this in a remediation type setting. So we would coat the seed with bacteria. As the plant emerges from the seed, then the bacteria colonize the roots, and it provides, whoa, sorry about that. I got a timer going here. It provides the plants with hormones and stress and chemicals that reduce the stress response to facilitate plant growth. Now, in a remediation setting, we would exploit various capabilities of the plant to remove contaminants. In this particular case, we're just using the ability of the bacteria to facilitate plant growth in challenging conditions. The other thing we did with this project is set up a plant development guide. It's really difficult to identify these seedlings as they were coming out of the ground when they were really tiny. So we have plant growth facilities here in-house, and we took the opportunity to grow these plants in ideal conditions where we could check them every few days and photograph them and see exactly what they look like as they were coming out of the ground until they got bigger and eventually until they flowered. So that gave us a plant development guide that we could then take to the field and use to identify those tiny little plants that were coming up amongst the stubble. The other side of the project we did was worked at Highfield Farms. I think Highfield's talked to Bee Canada in the past, so you're probably familiar with them. We have some trial areas there that we use, and they're great partners of ours. So in this particular case, you can see all the plots we set up here. We planted the individual species outside in conditions that were similar to what we saw on the site. So it's one thing to get a plant development guide and be able to landmark growth in ideal conditions. We also needed to see what was happening on the site. And given how difficult it is to identify the plants growing in the stubble, it was easier for us to landmark how big the plants should be and when they were going to flower if we grew them outdoors in a similar site. So that's what that site looked like. We actually took a pile of mulch and made these 1 meter by 1 meter plots to try the individuals seeds in. So site conditions, no topsoil. This was extremely compacted. We did no weed control, no fertilizer like on the site. Although on this site, we had to do a bit of watering because it was so exposed and dried out incredibly fast. We also had the opportunity to work with Highfield and use some of their liquid biological amendments that they had prepared. And we put 2 different types of amendments on area A and area B, and then area C we used as the control area. So what did we get out of planting on this site and also our side projects, and what did we learn? Well, the first is that the weather was a huge challenge this year. The goal was to get these seeds in the ground by mid-May. The reality was it wasn't planted until closer to the middle of June. And if you look at the graphs underneath, the one on the left is precipitation. The error bars actually represent the range of total precipitation in each month for the last 10 years. You can see when you look at the purple bars there, in May and June, the amount of moisture in the Calgary area was less than what has been seen over the last 10 years. July and August were okay, but the amount of precipitation that fell tended to fall in 1 or 2 days. So we had these long periods of no precipitation. If you look at the graph on the right, you can see what the temperatures did. So May and June, they were pretty good. Actually, May was pretty good. June and July, if you look at the purple bar and compare it to the error bars, which represent the range over the last 10 years, June and July in the city of Calgary were hotter than any year in the last 10 years. So not only did we plant this in June where there was almost no moisture, but it was also extremely hot. So how did it affect the site? Well, actually, we did really well. I have to say, I think we were all a little surprised at how well these flowers grew. So these are pictures from the site. You can see some of the Plains Coreopsis on the left, the sunflower in the middle there, and some more of the Plains Coreopsis on the right. And this slide just shows you the variety of plants and the color we got. The cover crops did really well. We saw the California poppy come up first, shortly followed by the trefoil, and then the Plains Coreopsis. And there was a lot of Plains Coreopsis, and the bees loved it. Then the prairie coneflower came up, and then we had both annual and perennial Giardia that came up. The tall purple plant there towards the left, we call that the stealth plant. That seed, we didn't get it to come up on the lab. We didn't get it to come up at the Highfield site, but lo and behold, near the end of the growing season, it popped up on the city site. So that was great. We also had yarrow, sainfoin, and some sage. I didn't see flowering on any of those, but I think Jenna saw some flowers in a couple of those plants. The grasses, they didn't go to seed because we were so late getting them in the ground. So they were hard to identify. Time we had received the grasses as mixes from the seed supplier. So we were not able to get the plant development guide in place for the grasses. However, that has now changed and we now have a plant development guide. So we're going to be able to go back to the field this spring and have a good look at what the grasses are and see if we can identify them. You can tell from the pictures provided here, though, that it is obvious that there is growth. You can see the rows from the cedar and you can see the mounds of the fescues there. Over to you, Ben.
Yeah, you bet. Time to talk about bees again. So with the social bee boxes, we did have a fairly late installation of those. Unfortunately, they were not installed until after July 1st. So definitely a little bit late in the year. And we did see that in our results. There was no occupancy within those social bee boxes. However, we are hoping for some in the following season, of course. Now with our solitary bee boxes, as mentioned, we have some really good occupation in these. 10 out of the 15 solitary bee boxes were occupied. And given the length of these bee boxes, they're actually fairly difficult to find that occupancy. So a borescope camera was utilized for that. What that shows is that those native pollinators are really maximizing the length of that nesting tube that we provided. In addition, we did some sweeps, some pollinator sweeps on our sites. In particular, later in the year, we pulled out 4 different bombus species off this site. We did this just once. A few of these species are not overly common in this particular area of Calgary, but I think likely it's probably a function of people not really looking for them, but they're definitely out there, in particular on this site.
The other area that we were responsible for was weed and litter control. And we were out there every couple of weeks doing the litter control on the site. It was a lot of fun at times, grind at times. We found some fun things like the painted rocks, and then we found some mystery things as well that we kind of shook our head at. And like, huh, amazing what people chuck from a vehicle. The weeds, they were a bit of a challenge. We had Canada thistle and kochia on the site. We ended up spot spraying those with a backpack sprayer on September 12th. You can see on the very left photo, that's what that thistle looked like before we got some herbicide on it. And then the spot spraying in the 2 middle pictures there, and then end of the season picture on the right. We did find that the thistle was inhibiting all of the seedling growth around it. So we'd start to see the seedlings come up from the seed that we planted. And then once the thistle got any kind of size, it would just wipe out anything around it. So it was important to get rid of that thistle and get rid of it before it started to flower. So some results with the liquid biological amendments. So at the Highfield site, we planted, as I mentioned, each of the individual species and then to the 2 grass mixes. The 2 liquid biological amendments are outlined there. They were applied to area A and area B, area A being in the blue, area B being in the purple, and then the control area was in area C. The plants with the little asterisk beside them, those are plants that we didn't get very good growth on, so we couldn't evaluate them on this site. The bee plant, like I said, it had a germination rate from the supplier of 6%. It needs to be stratified, so it didn't come up on our trials. The California poppy was a mystery to us because it grew everywhere on the city site. It was in those seed mixes. It didn't come up there at the Highfield site. It also didn't come up as an individual species on that site. So we couldn't evaluate it at the Highfield site when using a biological amendment. But basically using an N of 5 and measuring the plant's height, we didn't see any real benefit to putting these liquid biological amendments on the annuals or the grasses. However, when you look at the perennials, there was a big obvious difference. And liquid biological amendment number 1 on area A in the blue there gave a huge advantage to these plants growing on these little trial plots. So the reason we did this is because we wanted to see if there was something natural and fairly inexpensive that we could apply on the city site in the future if we really needed to boost the seed in some way. So hopefully we'll work with Highfield in the spring and get some of their biological amendment and maybe put it on some of the areas that we had difficult or not great growth on the city site. The Pep Systems Trial, that's the one where we coated bacteria onto the seed. We did that on a small portion of the median there, you can see in the red circle. The north side had the seed that was coated with PGPR. This is mixed B only that we were doing this trial with. And then the south side had untreated seed. Preliminary results, this is really early. The north side, they did, there was an equivalent diversity, so same species of plants popped up on both areas. The plant size was equivalent, but we found there was a much larger number of seeds that germinated with PGPR treatment versus the ones that didn't have a treatment. And of course, PGPR really only shines when there's challenging conditions. So getting these plants through winter survival will be very telling. And it'll be interesting to see if the PGPR help these plants over winter. So what did we learn? Despite the late planting, limited precipitation, and exceedingly hot temperatures, we actually got pretty good growth. The stubble is a bonus, and it was highly desirable. We got a huge rain shortly after this seed was installed, like, I mean, a huge downpour. And had that stubble not been in place, that seed would have washed down to the bottom of the slope. It also sheltered and protected that seed from the extreme heat and very dry conditions. The moisture was maintained in the soil, and it gave a bit of shade to the seed as it was germinating. The north and south sides of this site are not the same. You can see the two pictures there. The north side got more direct sun. It had a lot of plants. Those plants actually went to seed. Both California poppy, Plains coreopsis, Gaillardia had lots of seed generated from those plants. On the south side, you can see the plants were not as big. We didn't find a lot of seed on those seed heads, so they're not going to be the same going through the years. As we expect the annuals to reduce in number and the perennials to start to take over on these sites, I think we'll see that progress very differently on the two sites, and it'll be interesting to see what happens as we watch it. There's also some issues with the roadside. So it's fascinating to see how many people actually drive on the bottom of this slope on the south side, especially. The north side had a lay-by, and I think anyone that was looking to pull over in this area, it's 90 kilometers an hour here on the Trans-Canada. So anyone looking to pull over would utilize the road or the lay-by on the north side. The south side, people just pulled up on the grass area. And so there was a lot of thought that went into how do we revegetate that? And we did get seedlings start to get established, but I can tell you that I'm not sure it's worth the money, because no matter what you get to grow at the bottom of the slope, the cars and the vehicles that stop here are just going to destroy it. So not only is there elevated salinity, but it's a tough growing condition with the amount of vehicles that go on there. So we'll see. We're going to work with Highfield, hopefully get some liquid biological amendment on those and see if we can get it established. All I can say is that I'm not sure it's worth the effort, and that the money might be better spent putting effort into the other parts that aren't going to be impacted physically by the vehicles that we see on these sites. So I'm just going to finish by giving a shout out to the team. We work closely with Ethan, Jenna, and Peter at the City of Calgary. They were great to work with. They were very open to allowing an oil and gas environmental company come in and do some science on this site and really approach this as an experiment and do the vegetation assessments and be able to provide them with some real data on what was working and what wasn't working. You can see the folks from Earthmaster there. Want to shout out to Cashton, Mike, and Adam from our team that helped us with this project, especially Cashton and Mike that spent a fair amount of time looking at the unique things that people chucked out the windows along with Kent. Mathis Natvik, who's a professor at the University of Calgary, he worked with the city team and Gavin Wyman to get these seed mixes initially developed before we came on, and modified them depending on what we could get and how easy it was to get them installed. And I want to give a big shout out to our subcontractor, Seasonal Impact. We hadn't worked with them in the past, and on short notice, we had them come in and they were eager to help us out in whatever way we can. So shout out to them. They were great prepping that site for us before we installed the seed. So thank you guys for listening to us today. We're happy to take your questions. You can see our website there. There's more information there about this project. And yeah, thanks for listening to us today.
Great. Thank you all so much for those great presentations. I know we're already a bit past the half-hour mark, but we've been getting so many good questions. So we'll try to get a few of those in before we close. So one question, and I know all of our speakers have been really great about answering a lot of the questions in the Q&A already through text. So a lot of the answers are there, but a few in the chat. Probably a question for Jenna. Are you reaching out to homeowners to teach Calgary residents about how to do habitat restoration on their own properties? Oh, I think you might be muted.
There, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yep.
Perfect. Sorry about that. Yes, we are. Generally, that's kind of not my thing so much because I do the botany aspect of the work, but we do have our fabulous team with environmental education that does promote naturalization, and they do provide materials and resources for homeowners that want to naturalize their lawns and do more of a naturalized landscape design. They also have a publication forthcoming that includes some of the top plants for pollinators, according to the research that we've done with the University of Calgary.
Great, thank you. And another question from the chat. Do you stratify seeds before broadcasting?
We don't.
No.
Yeah, I mean, the amount of seed that we have, it becomes a little prohibitive to try and do that with the large volume of seed. Ben, Kent, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, no, we haven't done anything on that size for sure.
I rely on using clean seed, which has had the pappus and awns and stuff removed, so it's kind of like a pseudo stratification. And I rely on timing. So early spring, late fall timing to get that natural stratification through the varying temperatures and precipitation regimes. So basically the clean seed, nature, especially when you're dealing with large volumes, as Earthmaster mentioned, that seems to work the best for me.
Yeah, and I think the bee plant's going to be a prime example of that. It was not stratified before it went in. Was clean seed that went in. We're expecting that a large amount of bee plant will pop up after it's gone through a winter.
And a question from the Q&A, how much self-seeding from annuals is expected?
We did have a look at what produced seed. So there are lots of California poppy seed, a lot of Plains coreopsis seed, some Gaillardia seed. Like I said in that talk, though, the north side is going to be very different from the south side. Didn't get a lot of seed production from the seed heads on the south side, so I'm not expecting a lot. I would be very disappointed to not see a lot of those annuals come up this spring. Kent and Ben, would you agree with that? Especially on the north side.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we did take a look at some of the yield from those plants and the seed production from there. So we do have an idea of what was produced, in particular on that north side. But because this is a 3-year pilot project, that's one of the take homes that we're hoping to see during the 3 years, both the reestablishment of these annuals and that slow decline, likely as we continue to get stand closure. We will see that decline. We're expecting that, as well as the effects of the natural stratification on the site. So the next 3 years are going to be very interesting to watch for that.
Great. And another question from the Q&A, is Calgary pioneering these techniques for prairie conditions?
Yeah, I would think so, probably, eh, Jenna?
I think so, yeah. I think we're pretty unique in with respect to what we've done and what we've accomplished. So
yeah, this is not necessarily an easy place to grow. I know a lot of agriculture goes on in this area. But this particular site, there's a really strong west to east wind there, and it's very exposed, and it's some challenging conditions. We also did some soil analysis on that site. There's some nutrient deficiencies there. The idea was the site would not be watered or fertilized. So it needs to produce this on its own without a lot of intervention by putting things in the soil. So yeah, there's going to be lots to learn from this project.
One of the main objectives with this pilot project is we're looking for scalable options. So here we have 5 hectares, which is a fairly good size, but we're looking for solutions to scale it up to much larger areas and much larger in size in a cost-effective manner.
Yeah, and Jenna, maybe you can comment on this. One of the things that it's great to do this project where there's existing turf grass. We've had stubble to help us. But could you take this and go to a site that had no plants on it and put it in bare soil? I don't know. I'm not so sure this particular mix would do that great in this condition. I think it's really, especially in the conditions we saw this summer, it really benefited from having this stubble there. I don't know, Jenna, what do you think about that?
I think we would just have to kind of do something to mimic the stubble, like for example, Canyon Meadows with the pen mulch cover, and also like some, maybe a little bit of earth shaping, maybe a slight terracing, something like that to encourage the seed to stick. I think it would definitely be doable, but we just have to tweak it a little bit on an area that did not have the existing plant matter.
And definitely get it in the ground a lot sooner than the middle of June.
Yes, that's always a challenge. So crews and contractors and everything, but
yeah.
Another question from the chat. Do you have any thoughts on trying to establish biocontrol insects specific to thistle control?
That's a good question. Our integrated pest management group does a lot of biocontrol. They've done a lot of work with leafy spurge, OGs, and numerous other ones I can't remember. I think everybody's looking for biocontrol for thistle.
Yeah,
In all
totally.
honesty.
It's nasty. That stuff is nasty.
I don't know if that's will ever be solved, but also too, we do have native thistles that are important. So that's something that we have to consider as well. However, yes, they're definitely not nearly as prolific as like the Canada, aka creeping thistle. I think if there was such a tool, integrated pest management would probably be on it because, like I said, they do a lot of different various biocontrols.
Another one.
With leafy spurge, actually. They've had a lot of success with the leafy spurge biocontrol work. I've seen some pictures of before and after, and it's amazing.
Another question from the chat. How much self-seeding from annuals is expected?
Oh, I think we got that one already.
Oh, did we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's part of the experimental nature of this project, is to see how this progresses from annuals to perennials.
Great. Yeah, I've got so many questions. I can't keep track of them all. I haven't done this one yet. Have you considered using biochar as a soil building resource?
I think the goal, certainly for this pilot project here, and keeping in mind this is a pilot project, there's going to be some learnings that will change how you would approach other sites in the future. But I think the goal is to minimize the amount of work that goes into this site to get it revegetated. So there's a lot of things that we could have added to this site. We could have fertilized it. We could have watered it. We could have, gone right away with a liquid biological amendment. We know there's nutrient deficiencies in the soil, but the question is, can we get this to work with minimal cost and input at the start? Because the more, and I don't really want to harp on cost, but cost, I mean, the reality is you have budgets and you have to try and do as much as you can with a budget. So if you can minimize the amount of cost that goes into getting these sites naturalized, then you can do more of it. And communities that maybe have less financial opportunity can also do more with this. So that's part of the goal. I'm Kent and Ben, and I'm sure you have lots to say about this.
Which is exactly why the city didn't choose us using our PGPR treatment, because they wanted something like, let's try this before having to add another input cost and be relied on it. So let's see what we can do without that first. And then we can work on other things to try after that, or if it's cost effective kind of thing.
Yeah. Ben, you want to comment on that?
I think that sounds great.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, the Highfield study was done to say, hey, well, if we can, you know, put a little bit more in the budget, like maybe we don't focus on seeding the bottom, but we focus on maybe a liquid biological amendment that will help us transition from annuals to perennials, because that data showed us it's got a huge benefit to the perennials, not so much the annuals. So maybe second year we apply a liquid biological amendment early in the year, and that'll help push the perennials past the annual cover crop and help transition this quicker and get these plants established and more healthy sooner.
So we'll just do a couple more questions. One, is there work with local nurseries and growers to produce native forb and grass seeds?
Yes.
Yes, and in some cases, part of the first year analysis that we did is we had a number of factors that we looked at. Did the seed come from the US or Canada? How expensive was it? How hard was it to work with? Blah, blah, blah. And we basically evaluated each seed type that we put in and gave it a score. And in some cases, we are pushing the city that if we can get a Canadian source, that might be more expensive than a US source, go with a Canadian source, go with local if you can. It's just going to be better in the end. But some of those species you just can't get, like we can get 20 kilograms of a particular flower, you know, in Canada on short notice. Often these growers need some time. If you tell them in 2 years, I'm going to need this much seed, then yeah, no problem. And the Canadian suppliers being able to produce it.
And I think that point exactly, Liz, is a really good point. Is the supply chains. I mean, here we are in 2022 talking about supply chain management, and the same is true for the seed, in particular for native seed procurement. I think to scale this up on a much larger basis across the prairies within Canada, I think the suppliers and the logistics of that seed are going to have to be in jive and in harmony with each other, because it's all going to have to work together.
So we'll just do one last question. This one.
Ask the oil and gas one, please.
All right, maybe I'll do two. It's the oil and gas one. Is it a more difficult site than oil and gas site remediation?
I'm going to say no.
It depends on where in the province, I guess. I mean, yeah, in a way it was, because we had poor quality soil. We had lots of undesirables already established. We had lots of weeds established, probably not great topsoil, etc. I mean, remediation and reclamation in other parts of the province, you have good topsoil, etc. You start at, you know, you can start with what the seed you pick it suitable for the area, I think.
And we can fertilize.
Yeah, if we fertilize. I mean, maybe if you go into the Hannah Brooks kind of area where there's not much topsoil, yeah, maybe it's probably more difficult to reclaim sites out there. But yeah, I think we definitely had some challenges here with, there was no fertilizer. We didn't really want to spray a whole bunch, traffic in the city all around us. So yeah, it was equally challenging, I would say. I don't know if anyone else have anything to add on that. Maybe I didn't answer it adequately, but.
Well, I was just going to mention the phytoremediation that we do. When we phytoremediate using plants, we're looking at removing contaminants from soil. It's poor quality subsoil. It's full of hydrocarbons and salts. The PGPR really shine in that setting. So we're really good at growing certain types of plants on really dirty soil. We're not, we have more tools, I think, at times available when we're doing that, because we know we can fertilize it a lot If we have to irrigate it, we'll pull some water out of the sumps that we build to irrigate those sites. And the hydrocarbon is a source of carbon for the bugs, the bacteria, and the plants. So there's a lot of food in those soils. So it's a little bit easier to get stuff established at times. And it's, I can tell you that as we did these vegetation assessments throughout the summer, working on that median was a scary prospect. And I think it's more scary than working on an oil and gas site in remote Alberta. Ben, you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, well, besides the heavy traffic and the speed limit being 90 kilometers per hour, whatever it is, and loud mufflers and whatnot. Yeah, it was definitely a different site. Was it harder? I wouldn't say necessarily harder. It's all about using the right tools for the job on the right site. So, every ecologist and biologist has certain tools in the toolbox to deploy. And it's just a matter of using the right tools at the right time.
Yeah.
You also have to know what you're looking at. And I think Kent and Ben have become very good experts at looking at soil and saying, this is what I know I can do, and this is what we're going to run into a problem with. So it's not just a matter of, here's the seed mix, here's the seed, or go do it. You also have to understand what you're looking at. And that just takes years of experience of dealing with all types of conditions.
Yeah, I think the thing here is going to be the control of the weeds, the thistle in particular, because it's just going to keep coming back. There's not a lot of great controls for it unless you just blanket spray, and we don't want to do that here. It's a sensitive area. So we want to be very careful, and we want to establish what we've got or continue to grow with what we've got. So, I mean, that's why we didn't do a big spray event. We just wanted to hit what we could and hopefully control it, and we'll look for other ways to do it too. A few people have had some ideas. We can look into that for sure.
So maybe we'll close it out with kind of a bit of a difficult question, but how can people be encouraged to plant in their own backyards? Often people are worried about a messy look.
Yeah, I'll just have a quick chime in because I know Ben's probably got something he wants to say about it, but or Kent, I'll put you guys in the hot seat. Jenna for sure. It's all about education, right? Like everybody looks at long grasses and flowers, and not everybody recognizes a flower as a wildflower. They recognize it more as a weed, and they think it needs to go. And it's changing how people look at backyard and roadside environments, I think.
I think the transformation in the mindset, I think it's coming. I don't think it's there completely yet, but there's a lot of people that have commented that they enjoy the longer vegetation, the flowers, things like that. We still have, some people that like the more standard manicured turf kind of look, but like you said, Liz, I think it's education. And I also think that, if you have something colorful, I think that definitely helps sell the idea. So, for me, using that kind of the ground cover in those bee beds with blue flax, where it's blue a lot of the time, and then our dominant plains coreopsis. I think when people see color, even if it is long vegetation, that's a good sell.
Yeah, the flowers sell the rest of it, right? If you have a sea of flowers in amongst the tall grasses, people will be a lot more accepting, I think. We got lots of comments. Kent and Ben, you can talk more about that, but we definitely got lots of comments from the neighborhood, people walking their dogs, how much they really appreciated all the flowers and the native vegetation.
Yeah, well, and the mayor drove past there every day, and he's came by one day and came to look at the site and met with us, and he was ecstatic about it too. So that was awesome as well. And I know there's been a bunch of social media stuff out there too on it, and good feedback on that too. So
yeah,
there is some educational material on the city's website as well about naturalization, and we are, I think, going towards providing more information regarding how to naturalize your lawns and things like that. With respect to that Alberta Low Impact Development Partnership, they also have a lot of information and resources for people that actually would like to do this in their own yard. Sometimes they'll actually sometimes they'll actually fund that, and then they'll study it as long as, you know, they'll pay for it to get it done. They'll get it done as long as you allow them to study it. So that's another opportunity for homeowners.
Yeah, and there's tons of signs up all over the place, all over that site. We've almost oversigned it, maybe, in my opinion, because I had to put them all up. But there's a lot of our signs up. There's a lot of city signs up, so people are being informed. We're going to be working with one of the schools that's close by, and doing some talks with them. And they're also, I believe, going to be putting up some flower beds of their own and using some of our seeds. So that's kind of neat too. So there's some schools being involved, and I don't know if those were the kids that put those rocks out there, but that was kind of neat too, because I saw that a number of those little rocks that they had painted up was kind of neat to see as well. So I think people are getting, you know, getting the idea of, yeah, maybe some interest in this, and they might try it in their yard or consult us and ask us for some advice. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and you can find more information about this project on our website. There's a case study there from the project with some other pictures, and there's also a link to the CBC Calgary article that was done about the project in July. They were great. They came out to the site and had lots of good questions.
That's great. I couldn't think of a more positive and inspirational way to close this out. I'd like to thank our speakers for taking the time to share their expertise and their experience with restoration. And I'd like to thank everyone who's still on the line, and thank you for staying an extra half hour for questions, but to thank everyone for tuning in and engaging today. And I said it in the chat, but this webinar is being recorded, so we are going to have it up on the Bee City YouTube channel, and I'll make sure an email goes out to everybody in the next few days, so everybody has the link to that. So otherwise, yeah, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll be looking forward to seeing everyone in the spring for future Bee City webinars. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.